Welcome to this episode of the Aquarist's Edge, a podcast for home aquarists just like you. Learn more about how to keep a thriving aquarium and discover ideas and tips to give your aquarium the edge. And now, over to our host, Arthur Preston.
Hi there, welcome back to the Aquarist's Edge. This is a podcast for people who want more than just fish that are alive in their aquarium, but who want to develop a thriving long-term ecosystem. Now, today's topic has a slightly dramatic title, but it's something every hobbyist needs to understand. How is your tank lying to you? Because, let's face it, aquariums can be sneaky. They can look beautiful, clean, and peaceful, while at the same time quietly stressing your fish, starving your plants, or loading up toxins in the background. And so in this episode, we're going to unpack the false comfort signals that we all tend to trust. And by the end of the episode, I want you to be able to look at your tank and think, now I know what you're trying to hide from me. And then actually do something about it before there's a disaster. And as we go, I'd love you to think, what were those subtle signs that I can see now that I may have missed before? And if something comes to mind, write it down. You can then go back and refer to it and hopefully use the advice from this podcast to rectify what the problem is. Has your tank been lying to you? Well, let's get into it and try to figure that out. And the first and most famous lie is this: my water is crystal clear, so the tank must be healthy. On social media, so many tanks look like glass boxes full of liquid air. There are no particles, there's no cloudiness, there's just that beautiful blue-white sparkle. And your brain goes, wow, that must be perfect water. But let's be clear about this. Clarity is a visual property, not an indicator of health. So what's really in that crystal clear water? That beautiful water that you might see online may still contain ammonia, which is colorless but extremely toxic to fish, even at low concentrations. It may contain nitrite, which is also colorless and dangerous. It interferes with oxygen transport in the fish's blood. It could contain high nitrate, which is less immediately deadly, but stressing fish and fueling algae if allowed to climb. It could also contain dissolved organic compounds, things like hormones, breakdown products of food and waste, and all sorts of invisible chemistry. It could also have low oxygen levels. Now, you can't see this with your eyes, you can only see the consequences in your fish's behavior. And if you scooped a glass of that water and looked at it next to perfectly safe water, you probably wouldn't see a difference. Behind the scenes, your tank is a biochemical factory. Fish breathe, eat, excrete. Plants and bacteria transform nitrogen compounds. Microorganisms live and die constantly. A lot of that process doesn't announce itself with cloudiness. Now, let's briefly revisit the nitrogen cycle, because this is where most tanks will start the lying process. Very quickly, and you've heard me say this many times, but it's something that all aquarists do need to know. Let's quickly look at that nitrogen cycle. Fish and food introduce nitrogen as protein. Waste and uneaten food break that down into ammonia. Beneficial bacteria convert the ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate. And nitrate leaves through water changes, uptake from plants, or in some cases, deep anaerobic processing. Now, during the breakdown to ammonia and the conversion of that to nitrite and nitrate, your water can look sparkling. You know, it's really worth remembering that fish care more about what's dissolved in the water than how it's looked. Your fish experience chemistry, not your aesthetic. There are even times when water looking too pristine should raise an eyebrow. For example, new tanks that are very clear but not yet biologically mature. Tanks that have heavy chemical filtration, which can mask underlying issues. And tanks that used to have a light haze or a slight tint that suddenly go ultra clear after a big filter change or major cleaning. And that's when you've got to ask the question, is it that clear because the system is stable, or because I just wiped out a bunch of biology and I'm now sitting in between problems? So rather than trusting your eyes, build a habit of asking, what are my actual ammonia and nitrite numbers? What's my typical nitrate range? And has anything changed in the last week? Water clarity is nice, but it's like judging someone's health by their clothes. Looks can help, but they are absolutely not the entire story. The second lie I want to address is this: my fish are active and eating, so they must be happy. If fish were dramatic like puppies, this would be easier. They'd stagger around coughing, holding tiny signs saying, "Help, my nitrite is high," but they're prey animals. In nature, obvious weakness gets you eaten. That means they often look fine right up until the time they lose the ability to compensate. So we've got to be looking for small changes in behavior, not just obvious sickness. So let's talk about those behavioral lies that we'll see. They're still swimming, but how are they swimming? If they are loafing around the surface with occasional gasps, and near the top they're lazily taking gulps now and then, it's easy to brush it off as, oh, they like being there. But it's often an early sign of low oxygen or irritation from ammonia. What about clamped fins but still feeding normally? The fish still comes out for food, but the fins are held tight against the body instead of being relaxed and fanned out. And that's the fish saying to us, something is wrong, even if it's not completely crashing out yet. There's also something known as micro-hiding. This isn't total disappearance, but spending a lot more time than usual behind plants, filters or decor. They'll dart out to eat, then vanish again. Now this can indicate social stress, lighting that's too bright, or a constant low-level stress in the tank. You also might notice hyper-alert swimming. That's darting from one side of the tank to the other, reacting strongly to small stimuli. It's almost as if they've had way too much coffee. It's often linked with poor environment, that's sudden noises, vibrations, unstable parameters, or even electrical leakage. The other thing is you can look for timeline clues, and that is that fish will perk up or calm down dramatically at certain times of the day. They might be more erratic at lights on or lights off time, and that can signal a light schedule that is too abrupt or a mismatched photo period. It helps to distinguish acute stress, which is something bad just happened, from chronic stress, which is things have been slightly off for a long time. Acute stress looks like sudden frantic swimming, jumping attempts, or violent gasping after a big change, while chronic stress will look like poor appetite over time, faded colours, lower activity than normal, and susceptibility to diseases that seem to appear out of nowhere. What often tricks us is when fish still eat. As fish keepers, we're relieved. And we say to ourselves, well, they're eating, so they must be okay. But in reality, eating is often one of the last things that fish stop. So you need to develop a behavior radar. And you've got to train yourself to ask very specific questions when you look at your fish. Are their fins as open today as last week? Is their breathing rate faster than I'm used to seeing? Is this fish in its usual territory, or has it started staying somewhere else? And does this schooling species still school, or are individuals hanging off alone? You need to know what normal looks like for your tank, so that deviations can become obvious. Now, what about filters and flow? The lie here is the filter is running, so the filtration must be fine. Now, that humming box or bubbling sponge filter is comforting. It feels like security. But we need to think of filters not as devices, but rather as ecosystems. They really have three main jobs: mechanical filtration, biological filtration, and flow and oxygenation. And if any one of those falls behind, the others will suffer. Clogged sponges or floss can give you lies like the water looks clear, so the filter must be working. Meanwhile, inside the filter, water is channeled through a small path, bypassing most of the media, and oxygen delivery to bacteria drops, and the beneficial colonies of bacteria shrink or die back. Now, overclogged filters can do the opposite, and you'll hear the story, the lie that says, I made it sparkling clean inside, so it must be performing amazingly now. In reality, what you've done is stripped away a lot of your bacterial population, especially if you used untreated tap water to rinse the media. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. You want good flow and oxygenated water moving through mature biomedia, not sterile, polished plastic. Imagine you could follow a single water molecule from your filter outlet. Where does it go? Does it sweep the length of the tank, gently turning over the entire volume? Or does it swirl around in one corner while the other side becomes a quiet, stagnant pocket? Fish waste and uneaten food tend to collect where flow is weakest. Those are the zones where your tank quietly lies to you. You see the clear, multi-directional flow at the front, but behind the big rock pile, bad things might be brewing. It's good to remember that flow isn't about blasting the tank. It's about consistent, gentle circulation that lets your entire water volume see the filter. There's another hidden lie here, and that says this: the filter box says the filter is for 200 litres, so my 200 litre tank is covered. Now, those ratings assume fairly light stocking and often don't account for messy fish, plant load, or how you actually maintain the filter. So some questions that will give you more honest answers are these: how many fish and what kind am I keeping? How much do I feed in grams or pinches per day? How often am I cleaning pre-filters and sponges? And does my flow noticeably drop between cleaning? And over time, you will learn how hard your system is working, rather than just trusting the number on the filter box. Now let's look at the green side of the tank. Here's line number 4. My plants are green and I have a bit of algae, so things must be balanced. Plants and algae are actually reports about your tank's light, nutrients, carbon dioxide and organics. They're not decor, they're indicators. Healthy freshwater plants given enough time will show you consistent new growth, leaves that are full-sized for their species, and colour that matches or improves on how they looked in the shop. The subtle lies will show up when new leaves are smaller than the old ones. The new growth is paler, even while old leaves are still green, and the plant produces a few nice leaves but then seems to stall completely, or only the tops look good while the lower leaves slowly melt away. And these patterns can indicate nitrogen limitations, potassium deficiencies, micronutrient or iron issues, or root issues. The trick is to look at old versus new leaves separately, not just glance at the overall colour. It's also important to realise that algae is in many ways a feedback system for you. If you see soft green dust or algae that looks like fuzz, that's often linked to excess light compared to the massive plants. It tells you that your light intensity or duration might be too high for your nutrient level. An outbreak of hair algae often pops up when organics are high and the flow or CO2 in plant systems is inconsistent. In low-tech tanks, it often means too much light and not enough healthy plant biomass. Blackbeard algae loves unstable conditions and slow areas of flow. It often colonizes hardscape, filter outlets, older leaves that are near dead zones. And then of course you get that persistent brown dusty coating, that's diatom algae. This is quite common in newer tanks, but if it drags on for months, it can reflect ongoing imbalances, low light, high silicates, or not enough competition from other microlife. And if your tank insists on growing one type of algae over and over, that's not just annoying, that's your system shouting at you. And it's telling you this is the niche the conditions favour. Your substrate also gives you information. That's where a lot of the history of your tank lives. It's uneaten food that fell between the grains of the substrate, old plant roots, it's fish waste pulled down by currents, and biofilm, bacteria and tiny invertebrates. And over time you can get nutrient-rich zones that plants love, or detritus pockets that slowly leach organics, especially if there is no root activity. So pay attention to areas that always smell bad when you disturb them, or zones that puff little clouds of debris whenever fish dig. Spots where plants never really thrive, even when others in the same tank are fine. These are physical signs that your tank is holding a story beneath the surface. Now let's get a bit scientific here. We're going to talk about test results in chemistry, because the next lie is this. My test strip says everything is 0 and the pH is fine, so we're all good. Now, test kits are invaluable, but they're not magic, and water chemistry has more layers than just pH and nitrates. Some of the ways the numbers will lie to us include expired reagents, aged chemicals that flatten readings, and everything looks low or identical. It could be user error, not shaking the bottles enough, or not waiting the full development time, or comparing colors under warm, dim household light instead of neutral light. It could also be confusing the units in the scales. So one of your jobs as an aquarist is to treat tests like clues, not like infallible verdicts. pH, GH, and KH are easily overlooked, and sometimes people just focus on the pH. But what your tank might be hiding is instability rather than a specific number. KH buffers pH, and a low KH or carbonate hardness can mean that your pH swings more easily. And fish can often handle a slightly wrong but stable pH better than a perfect pH that wobbles back and forth day to day. General hardness, GH, tells you about the total calcium and magnesium content, which matters for osmoregulation and plant health. So your tank might be saying to you, hey look, my pH is in the acceptable range, everything's fine. But underneath it could be that your KH is nearly 0, or the pH is sliding slowly as biological activity produces acids. We must remember that fish are living in a chemistry that shifts around them all the time. It's like living in a house where the floor moves a little every day. Even if the average height is okay, the movement itself is exhausting. The more advanced way to think is this. What does my chemistry do over time? What happens between water changes, and what happens when I add driftwood, new plants, and different foods? Now, what about temperature, light, and sound? We've talked about chemistry, biology, and behavior, but now what about these invisible things, the things that your fish feel that we often ignore. So line number 6 is the heater light is on, the tank looks bright, the conditions must be fine. Many aquarists set a heater to say 25 degrees Celsius, see fish swimming, and never revisit it. But in reality, thermometers can be inaccurate. Heaters can drift or fail. Different parts of the tank may not be the same temperature, and some fish can handle wide ranges, but others don't. And temperature affects metabolism, immune function, and the oxygen demand in the water. A swing of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius over a short period can be stressful, even if both endpoints are technically within the species' acceptable range. So instead of asking what is my temperature, ask yourself, how stable is my temperature? Does it change from lights off to lights on? And does it spike on hot days or drop near windows in winter? In terms of lights, let's remember that aquarium lights are designed to make you see the tank well. Fish come from habitats with jungle canopies, murky, tannin-stained water, floating plants, or seasonal changes in daylight. So when you slam a high-intensity light onto clear glass with no shade, you can end up with fish constantly hovering under the filter outlet or behind a rock, or species that should be cruising mid-water but are instead hugging the bottom, or sudden dashes and panic behavior when the lights flip on or off. That's your tank saying, hey, this looks great on camera, but I'm living under a spotlight. Now, adding floating plants, taller stems, wood or rock to break up light can change fish behavior dramatically. They start using the entire tank again, exploring instead of hiding. Now, there's one more area where tanks will lie. And the line number 7 is this: my fish are listed as peaceful, so everything is fine socially. Fish come with labels like peaceful, semi-aggressive, schooling, and so on. Those are hints, not guarantees. The actual social climate of your tank depends on group sizes, tank layout, territory opportunities, feeding style, and individual personalities. Schooling fish like tetras, danias, and rasboras are very good at faking being calm when kept in numbers that are too low. They'll sort of hang out together, but individuals may be more jittery, colors can remain dull, and they may hover in one tight corner instead of utilizing the entire tank. But when kept in proper group sizes, they will spread out and move more naturally. You will see more nuanced interactions, and the tank will look calmer, not more chaotic. And if a supposed schooling fish constantly hides alone, that's your tank lying to you by saying we're peaceful. But actually the social structure is failing that fish. Territorial species, and that's everything from dwarf cichlids to some gouramis, rely on visual boundaries. If your aquascape is just an open rectangle of line of sight, there's nowhere to escape being seen. One dominant fish can monitor everyone all the time, leading to chronic stress even if there's no constant biting. But if you build caves, rock piles, you have tall plants, or you have wood that breaks up sight lines, you create micro-territories, and fish can move out of view, which lets them relax. Chasing will still happen, but it stops quickly, and because there are actual walls and rooms in the tank. So we've talked in this episode about many ways your tank can mislead you. Clear water, active fish, running filters, green plants, nice looking test numbers, stable looking equipment. How do you turn that around? The goal isn't to become paranoid, it's to set up your routine so that the lies can't survive very long. And here are a few mindset shifts that make a huge difference. Number 1, treat your tank as a system, not separate parts. Instead of thinking the filter is fine, the fish are fine, the plants are fine, the tests are fine, rather think this: the fish, the plants, the bacteria, the substrate, the light, and the water chemistry are one connected system. If algae shows up, don't just blame the light. Ask what changed in stocking, feeding, maintenance, or chemistry as well. Number 2, build habits, not heroic interventions. Our aquariums will often crash when we alternate between long periods of saying, I guess it's okay, and a sudden big intervention, a massive clean water change, lots of chemicals thrown in. The truth is, the less dramatic your maintenance feels, the healthier your system will tend to be. Small regular habits such as checking the behavior daily, testing on a set schedule, moderately sized, consistent water changes, and gentle, staggered filter maintenance will mean that your tank has less chance to quietly drift into dangerous territory. Number 4, question the assumption of it's always been fine. It's really a dangerous phrase. I've always done it this way, it's okay. Often what that really means is, the tank has coped so far, not this is best. As your fish grow, as plants fall in, as organics accumulate, as tap water chemistry changes over seasons, what used to be fine can suddenly become too much. So when you catch yourself saying it's always been okay, add the question, and is it still okay now? for this level of stocking in the tank, in this stage of the tank. So we've covered crystal clear water, hiding ammonia, nitrate, and other invisible issues, why fish behavior is more honest than their willingness to eat, the difference between a filter that's simply running and one that's simply truly processing waste and moving water properly, how plants and algae and substrate act as witnesses to your balance of light, nutrients, and organics, and the ways numbers from test kits can mislead you if you don't think in trends and don't understand KH, GH, and stability. And lastly, how temperature, light, sound, stocking, and layout quietly shape whether your fish feels safe or stressed. Now, if there's one core idea I would like you to take away, it's this: don't rely on any single sign. Build a wider picture. Real confidence with your aquariums comes from layering what you see, what you measure, what you know about biology, and what you remember from your tank's history. Your aquarium will always be in motion, always changing, but when you understand the lies it tells and the truths hiding underneath, you will get ahead of problems instead of reacting to disasters. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful, maybe learned something new, please follow or subscribe to the Aquarist Edge podcast wherever you're listening. Maybe on your favorite podcast app, perhaps you are watching or listening on YouTube. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, leave a review, rate the episode, whatever you need to do. These actions that you take help us to spread the news of this podcast to other folks in the hobby. I'd love to hear from you. If your tanks ever lied to you, add some thoughts to that in a comment on the app or on YouTube. Was there a time you thought everything looked great but later realized the warning signs were there? So send your stories and your questions, and they may well shape a future episode. Well, folks, that's it. We're almost at the end of 2025. There's probably going to be another episode or two before we close up for the year, and then we'll be hitting 2026. I want to thank each of you. If you've listened this long in the podcast, thank you. Thank you for the time you give to listen to this podcast week after week. It's been really great to see the growth of the podcast, both on the podcast platform and on YouTube. It's great to see the number of people who are so keen to build healthy aquatic ecosystems. And so until we meet again next week, keep learning, keep discovering, and keep enjoying this amazing hobby. Bye for now.
That's it for this episode of the Aquarist Edge. Please consider subscribing to this podcast so that you don't miss further episodes. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast, as this helps make it visible to others. Until next time, keep learning and discovering, and keep finding your Aquarist Edge in this captivating and fascinating hobby.